An appeals court affirmed a ruling that trafficking and reciprocal tariffs exceeded presidential authority under International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and most of former President Donald Trump's tariffs are illegal. But this isn't just about trade policy. It's about power. Presidential power, congressional authority, and the limits of executive action. This ruling has now set the stage for a dramatic showdown that could end up before the United States Supreme Court and potentially reshape America's entire approach to international trade. So, how did we get here? Why are Trump's tariffs under attack? And could this case decide just how much power a president really has over America's economy? Let's break it down. This all began with one of the most controversial moves of Trump's presidency: his sweeping use of tariffs as a weapon. Tariffs, for decades, were a tool largely controlled by Congress, not the White House, but over the years, lawmakers delegated some of their power to presidents, giving them the ability to impose trade restrictions during times of national emergency. And Trump took that authority to a level no president had ever dared. In April 2020, during his fiery Liberation Day rally, Trump invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a 1977 law originally meant to let presidents respond to national security threats, and used it to impose steep tariffs on foreign imports. China was his primary target, but other nations also felt the sting. At first, the move was cheered by his supporters as a bold stand for American workers. The Trump administration argued these tariffs were necessary to combat what they saw as decades of unfair trade practices. That hollowed out U.S. manufacturing, and the numbers told a dramatic story. By July of that year, tariff revenue had soared to $142 billion, more than double what it had been the year before. But there was a problem, a constitutional one. Fast forward to today. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit issued a stunning opinion, ruling in a 7-4 decision that Trump's executive orders imposing these tariffs exceeded the authority granted to him under the IEEPA law. In simple terms, the judges said Trump went too far. That while the law gives presidents certain emergency powers, it does not give them unlimited authority to rewrite trade policy at will. The court declared the tariffs invalid and contrary to law. However, and here's where things get even more dramatic, the court allowed those tariffs to remain in place temporarily until October 14th, giving the Trump administration a window to appeal to the Supreme Court. So while the court ruled against Trump, the tariffs are still standing. For now, Trump, never one to back down, immediately fired back. On Truth Social, he blasted the court's decision, calling it highly partisan and warning that removing his tariffs would be a total disaster for the country. He wrote, "If these tariffs ever went away, it would literally destroy the United States of America." His message was clear. Tariffs weren't just an economic tool. They were a cornerstone of his vision for American power. White House spokesperson Kush Desai echoed this sentiment, stating that Trump had lawfully exercised the tariff powers granted to him by Congress, and expressing confidence that the Supreme Court would ultimately uphold the tariffs. But what's at stake here isn't just about tariffs on steel, aluminum, or electronics. This case is about the balance of power between Congress and the president. For decades, Congress has ceded authority over tariffs and trade policy, giving presidents more leeway to act unilaterally. Trump took that authority to its extreme, using emergency powers to reshape America's trade relationships. Critics argue that if this decision stands, it could force Congress to reclaim its constitutional role in imposing taxes and tariffs, something that hasn't happened in over half a century. Actions say the courts are undermining America's ability to respond quickly to global economic threats, especially at a time when trade tensions with China, Russia, and other nations remain high. And let's not forget, Trump has made tariffs a centerpiece of his second-term agenda. He's promised to double down on his economic warfare strategy, using tariffs not only to pressure China, but also to push allies and adversaries into renegotiating trade deals. If the Supreme Court takes this case, it won't just be about Trump's policies. It will set a precedent for future presidents, Republican or Democrat, and how much power they wield over America's economic future. There's also historical context here. Back in 1971, President Richard Nixon used emergency powers to impose tariffs during a financial crisis when he abandoned the gold standard. Courts at the time upheld Nixon's actions, setting a precedent could use emergency powers in extreme economic situations. Trump's legal team is now leaning heavily on that precedent. But critics say Nixon's actions were taken during a genuine financial emergency, while Trump's tariffs were part of a broader policy strategy, something Congress, not the president, should decide. So where does this leave us? Right now, America is heading toward a high-stakes legal battle that could determine how much economic power any president holds. If the Supreme Court upholds the appeals court ruling, future presidents may be stripped of their ability to use tariffs as leverage in global negotiations without Congress's approval. But if Trump wins, it could cement a precedent that gives the White House sweeping authority over trade, effectively reshaping U.S. economic policy for decades to come. This isn't just legal drama. This is about global trade, America's relationships with its biggest economic partners, and the role of presidential power in a rapidly changing world. As of now, Trump's tariffs remain in effect, but the clock is ticking. The Supreme Court has until October 14th to decide whether to step in. If they do, brace yourself. This could become one of the most consequential Supreme Court battles of the decade. Because this case isn't just about tariffs. It's about the very nature of presidential power in America. What do you think? Should presidents have the power to unilaterally impose tariffs during economic emergencies? Or should Congress take back control of trade policy? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading and replying to the best ones.